Now remember the big picture. We said that there's three main steps to transformation. Remember the first one? Awareness. Second one? Cleansing. And the third one? Restoration. Okay. Now we're still in that awareness stage. So we'll get to the cleansing restoration. So be patient with me. But you got a piece of paper that looked like this. And this is something we call a father map. Yeah, father map. What we want is by the end of the day today, for you kind of to map the state of your heart. So when we're done today, you should kind of have a picture how this looks inside for you. Now we're not going to do it all at once, we'll do it step by step. But I just want you to know where we're going, so you can have that. But to do this, we've got to go a little bit deeper into these four areas. So that we understand them really well. Now remember, these four areas are essential for the health of your soul. If they're gone, you're in trouble. Like if I took oxygen out of this room, you're in trouble. So we need to understand them a little bit more so we can tell, do we have them or do we not? And we're going to dive into a different section of Scripture. Do you remember the two places we heard the Father talking to the Son? Where was the first one? Baptism, the second one is Transfiguration. He said the same thing both times. But if you look at John 5, we don't overhear a conversation between the Father and the Son. But we hear the Son talking about his relationship with the Father. And let's look at John 5. Yeah, here we go, four things again. And then John 5. Let me give you a context for this passage. Jesus has gone to a pool called Bethesda. He found a man there who had been an invalid for 38 years. He's laying by the water waiting for the angel to stir the waters. Jesus comes up to him and asks him a strange question. He says, do you want to get well? That's kind of a strange question. But sometimes people who are sick don't want to get well. They want to stay where they're at. And the man said, I would love to, but I have no one to help me. Jesus says, well, pick up your bed and walk. Now, if I were that man, I would have argued with Jesus. Don't you remember what I just told you? I've been an invalid for 38 years. Do you know what an invalid is? Someone who can't walk. So why are you asking me to walk? But for some reason he believes Jesus. And he picks up his bed and walks. A fabulous miracle. But there was one problem with this miracle. It happened on the wrong day. Because there are right days for miracles and wrong days for miracles. No miracles on the Sabbath. No miracles in church for us. No. Because miracles are work, right? Not good to work on the Sabbath.
Un sabatā strādāt, nē.
So the Jews are not happy with Jesus.
Tā kā jūdi ir galīgi neapmierināti ar Jēzu.
And look at, we pick up the story in verse 16.
16. pantā mēs pievienojamies šim notikumam.
So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jews persecuted him.
Un jūdi saka, Jēzu vajā, tādēļ, ka viņš to bija darījis sabatā.
Okay, picture Jesus.
Iedomājieties tagad Jēzu.
The Jewish leaders are persecuting you for healing someone who's been sick 38 years.
Jūdu vadītāji sāk kādu vajāt par to, ka viņš dziedinājis kādu, kurš bija slims 38 gadus.
How would you respond?
Kā jūs reaģējat?
Now I might say, let me talk to you about the nature of the Sabbath.
Es varētu teikt, ziniet ko, parunāsim par sabata būtību.
Describe what the Sabbath is for and what it's not for.
Un aprakstītu viņiem, kam domāts sabats un kam tas nav domāts.
Or I might say,
Vai arī es varētu teikt,
I can't believe how self-centered you are.
es nevaru noticēt, cik jūs esat patmīlīgi.
And I might kind of attack them.
Un es varētu viņiem tā kā uzbrukt.
Or I might get some of my friends to defend me.
Vai arī es varētu pasaukt savus draugus, lai tie mani aizstāv.
Say, talk to the man, he's happy.
Es teiktu, parunājiet ar cilvēku.
So don't be unhappy with me.
Tāpēc nevainojiet mani.
But look at how Jesus responds. Look
Tas
at this
kā reaģē Jēzus.
What's the first thing he says? He says,
Pirmais, ko viņš saka,
my Father is always at work,
mans tēvs vēl aizvien strādā.
and I too am working.
Un es arī strādāju.
Now, wait, how did this become part of the conversation?
Kā tas te ienāk šajā sarunā?
Why is he all of a sudden talking about his Father?
Kāpēc viņš uzreiz sāk runāt par tēvu?
I wouldn't start talking about my Father.
Es šādā gadījumā nesāku runāt par tēvu.
And this is what's interesting, when people start pushing on Jesus,
Interesanti, tad, kad cilvēks sāk Jēzu tā kā grūstīt,
attacking him and trying to get him out of position,
uzbrukt viņam, izsist viņu no līdzsvaru,
he steps back into his relationship with the Father
viņš atkāpjas atpakaļ savās attiecībās ar tēvu.
because it's there that he's safe and secure.
Jo tieši tur viņš ir drošībā.
He's not safe and secure in arguments.
Viņš nav drošībā strīdos.
He's not safe and secure in counterattacks.
Viņš nav drošībā pretuzbrukumos.
He's not safe and secure in other people's opinions.
Viņš nav drošībā citu cilvēku izteiktos viedokļos.
But when he steps back into his relationship with the Father, there he's rooted and safe.
Bet, kad viņš pakāpjas atpakaļ un ir atkal savās attiecībās ar tēvu, tur viņš ir iesakņojies un
And this
drošs.
is a great lesson for all of us.
Tā mums visiem ir lieliska mācības to
That
tā.
the safest, most secure place in the world for you
Visdrošākā vieta pasaulē jums
is in your relationship with
ir
the
jūsu
Father.
attiecībās ar tēvu.
That's the place where we find safety.
Tā ir vieta, kur mēs rodam drošību.
And then this is what he says. He
Lūk, ko viņš
says,
saka?
the Father's always working and I'm working.
Tēvs aizvien strādā, un arī es strādāju.
Look at how the Jews respond.
Un kā tad reaģē jūdi?
The Jews tried all the harder to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath,
Un jūdi atkal sāk Jēzu vajāt tādēļ, ka viņš to bija darījis sabatā.
but he was even calling God his own Father.
Nevien tādēļ, bet tādēļ, ka viņš arī sauca Dievu par savu tēvu.
Making himself equal with God.
Sevi pielīdzinādams Dievam.
Okay, the Jews understood this.
Jūdi labi to saprata.
The Jews understood that if God was his Father,
Viņi labi saprata, ka ja Dievs ir viņa tēvs,
all of a sudden his value goes way up.
tad pēkšņi viņa vērtība,
See, he has authority. He has all kinds of things he has if God is his Father.
ļoti pieaug. Un visam, ko viņš darīja, visam citāds svars, ja Dievs ir viņa
And they're
tēvs.
saying, that's no fair.
Paklausieties.
You
Tas
can't
nav
say
godīgi.
that. Because then you go like way above us.
Tu nedrīkst tā teikt, tad tu uzreiz pacelies
You get-
augstu mums pāri.
You get so much authority and value if you become God's son. No
Tu esi
way.
Dieva dēls, tad tev piemīt tik daudz autoritātes un vairs. Nē, nekādā gadījumā.
We're not going to give you this.
Mēs tev to nepiešķiram.
What's happening is Jesus is finding his identity in relationship to his Father.
Bet šeit notiek tas, ka Jēzus rod savu identitāti savās attiecībās ar tēvu.
He's saying, hey, my Father's working, so I'm working.
Viņš saka, mans tēvs strādā, un arī es strādāju.
I know what to do because I look at him.
Es zinu, ko darīt, jo es skatos uz viņu.
I have authority to act because God's my Father.
Man ir vara darboties, jo
And
Dievs ir mans tēvs.
Then he goes on, he says in verse 19, Jesus also gave this answer. To tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself.
Un Un tad, ja es turpinu 19. pantā, viņš sniedz šo atbildi.
He can only do what he sees his father doing.
Tēvs nevar pats no sevis darīt neko, ja vien tas neredz tēvu.
Whatever the father does, the son also does.
Jo vienīgi to, ko dara tēvs, tāpat dara arī dēls.
This is all about identity.
Tas viss saistās ar identitāti.
He knows what to do because he knows whose he is.
Viņš zina, ko darīt, jo zina, kam pieder.
He knows who he is because he knows whose he is.
Viņš zina, kas viņš ir, jo viņš zina, kā piederīgais viņš ir.
And often the reason why we don't know how to act,
Un bieži vien iemesls tam, ka mēs nezinām, kā
or
rīkoties,
what we're supposed to do,
kas mums tagad būtu jādara,
or how not to get pushed around by everyone else's opinions about us.
un kā lai mums neiespaidotu citu viedokļu attiecībā uz mums.
The reason is because we don't know whose we are.
Iemesls tam ir tas, ka mēs nezinām, kam mēs īsti piedaram.
We don't know our identity.
Mēs nepārzinām savu identitāti.
Identity deeply impacts all of life.
Identitāte dziļi iespaido visu dzīvi.
What if my identity was I'm a criminal?
Un ja nu man identitāte ir šāda, esmu noziedznieks,
And a very good one.
un ļoti izcils,
Okay, how am I going to act in this room?
kā tad es šajā telpā rīkošos?
I'm going to be going, a purse,
Tur ir laksts,
a phone,
telefons,
a policeman.
policists.
Okay, I'm going to be hiding,
Es tad
stealing.
slēpšos, zakšu.
It's going to change the way I behave here.
Tas izmainīs manu izturēšanos.
What if my opinion is that I am the stupidest person in the world in this room? That's
Bet,
my identity.
ja es uzskatītu, ka es esmu stulbākais cilvēks pasaulē,
And someone up front says, ask a question.
un kāds pajautās man kaut ko,
I'm going to be the last one to answer.
es būšu pēdējais, kurš sniegs atbildi.
Because if I'm the stupidest person in the room, I certainly don't want you to know that.
Jo es esmu stulbākais šajā telpā, tad es negribu, lai jūs to uzreiz uzzinātu.
And if it's true about me, you'll find out soon.
Un, ja tā ir, tad drīz vien to jūs noskaidrosiet.
What if my identity is I am a servant of the living God?
Taču, ja man identitāte būtu šāda, es esmu dzīvā Dieva kalps.
I'm his son, his daughter.
Es esmu viņa dēls, viņa meita.
He's given me everything.
Viņš man
that
visu
I
ir
need.
devis.
Well, then I'm going to be thinking, how can I serve you?
Tad es domāšu, kā es varu jums
I'm
kalpot.
going to be thinking, I have everything I need to do that.
Un tad es domāšu, man taču ir viss, lai to izdarītu.
I'm going to know what to do and be secure in what I'm doing.
Es zināšu, ko darīt, un būšu droši tajā, ko daru.
And so you see Jesus standing here so firm, so rooted.
Jūs redzat, šeit Jēzus tā tik pārliecinoši, tik iesakņojies.
Wouldn't it be something if we were rooted like that?
Vai tas nebūtu kaut kas īpašs, ja arī mēs būtu ar tādām saknēm?
And we knew exactly who we were and whose we were.
Ja mēs labi zinātu, skaidri apzinātos, kas mēs esam un kam piederam.
Now, fathers are supposed to do this. They're at least supposed to start this process.
Tēviem tas būtu jādara, no viņiem sagaida, ka viņš šo procesu aizsaka.
And often they don't, because maybe they didn't get it from their dads either.
Taču bieži viņi to nedara. Varbūt viņi to nesaņem paši no savu tēvu.
But fathers are supposed to speak words of identity and value to us.
Taču tēviem būtu jārunā mums vārdi, kas ir ar vērtību un sniedz identitāti.
Now, I told you this was actually an area my dad did a good job in.
Es jums teicu, ka mans tēvs to labi izdarīja.
I remember when I was about 4 years old,
Atceros, ka man 4 gadu vecumā
everyone said I had only one volume.
visi teica, ka man bija tikai viens skaļums.
Loud. I just did everything loudly.
Viss, ko es darīju, bija skaļi.
So you could, if I was talking over there, you'd hear me all the way across.
Ja es būtu tur un sarunātos, jūs dzirdētu arī šeit.
Now, someone could say, Dave, stop being such a pain.
Kāds varētu teikt, Dēļ, nu beidz būt tik kaitīgošs.
You're so insensitive.
Tu esi tik neiejūtīgs.
And I think I was insensitive.
Un es domāju, ka es biju.
But this is what my dad said.
Bet mans teica teica,
He said, Dave, you're going to be a really good preacher someday.
Dēļ, tu kādien būsi ļoti labs sludinātājs.
Because you know how to project your voice.
Jo tu zini, kā savai balsī likt skanēt.
And I went, really?
Es teicu, jā.
And I started to dream about being a preacher.
Un es sāku sapņot, ka es kļūšu par
See, he saw a characteristic in me and pointed it in a direction.
Viņš ieraudzīja manī kādu īpašību un to virzīja kaut ko.
And I went, if my dad thinks I can be a preacher, maybe I can become one.
Un es domāju, ja mans tēvs domā, ka es varu būt par sludinātājiem,
See,
varbūt tiešām var par tā kļūt.
those are words of identity and value.
Tie vērtības pilni identificējoši vārdi.
remember when I was 18 years old and was leading my first guys' Bible study.
Atceros 18 gadu vecumā es vadīju savu pirmo Bībeles studiju nodarbību puišiem.
And I got this crazy idea that we should go to another town.
Un man bija šīs uzmāca dublā doma, ka mums būtu jāpārceļas citu pilsētu.
And help the youth group there do an evangelistic event.
Un jāpalīdz jauniešu grupai tur veikt kādu evanģelizācijas pasākumu.
Now, we were way too young to be doing any of this.
Mēs īstenībā bijām pārāk jauni, lai kaut ko
And
tādu
had absolutely no experience.
bez jebkādas pieredzes.
And so we started planning this.
Mēs sākam to plānot.
And the parents of all the other guys
Un vispār jau puišu vecāki
started asking, hey, do you really know what you're doing?
sāk viņam jautāt, jūs tiešām zināt, ko jūs darat?
Can you really do this? Have you ever done this before?
Jūs tiešām to varat izdarīt, jūs esat jebkad to jau darīt.
Can we trust you with our kids?
Vai mēs varam viņus uzticēt savus
And I
jauniešus?
started getting really nervous.
Un viņi
I
sāk
don't know
ļoti nervus.
what to do.
Es nezinu, ko darīt.
And I remember driving in the car with my dad.
Atceros, ka es braucu mašīnā ar tēti.
And I told him about the problem. And I said, Dad, what do you think we should do?
Un es viņam izstāstīju par šo problēmu, teicu, tēti, kā tu ko mums vajadzētu darīt?
I don't know exactly how to put this program together.
Es pat īsti nesaprotu, kā to programmu visu sastāvīt.
And my dad thought for a minute.
Mans tētis padomāja.
And he says, I don't know either.
Es arī nezinu.
He said, but I have confidence that you're going to figure it out.
Taču man ir pārliecība, ka tu to visu atrisinās.
Because God's with you.
Jo Dievs ir ar tevi.
And He's going to use you in this.
Un viņš tev šajā lietos.
All of a sudden I went, oh,
Pēkšņi.
okay,
Labi.
we'll be fine.
Viss izdosies.
Because my dad believes in me.
Jo mans tētis man
And he's
teica.
standing with me.
Un viņš stāv man blakus.
When a father speaks words of identity and trust,
Kad tēvs izrunā identitātes un paļāvības
words
vārdus,
of value,
vērtības vārdus,
then we have great courage and sometimes do things that we never would if that were true.
tad mēs iegūstam reizēm tādu drosmi, ko mēs citādi nemaz neuzdrošinām uz mēģinājumu.
Now, some of you are maybe sitting there thinking, yeah, but my dad didn't do that at all.
Bet kādam varbūt sēž domā, bet mans tētis gan tā nedarīja.
One of the things we're going to be talking about is how you can be refathered by God.
Viena no lietām, par ko mēs pārnāsim, ir par to, kā atrast jaunu tēva stāvokli no Dieva.
Because the best dads are not enough.
Jo pat labākais tēvs nekad nebūs pietiekami.
There was a man who taught at a seminary in the United States. His name was Fred Craddock.
Kāds vīrs, kas bija pasniedzējis seminārā Amerikā, viņu sauc Freds Krediks,
He taught homiletics, which is how to preach.
viņš mācīja homilēti, kas nozīmē sludināšanas vāku.
One summer he went to Tennessee on vacation
Reiz viņš nonāca Tenesijas štatā atvaļinājumā.
and sat down in a restaurant
Apsēdās restorānā,
in a town called Gatlinburg.
pilsētā, ko sauc Gatlinburg.
Gatlinburg, yeah.
Gatlinburg.
It doesn't matter, you don't know where that is. But the restaurant was full, and so an elderly man came and sat down at the table with him.
Restorāns bija pilns, kāds pavacāks kungs atnāca un apsēdās pie viņa galva.
The man said to him, what do you do?
Un šis vīrs jautāja viņam, ar ko nodarbojas?
And Fred really didn't want to talk to anyone.
Un Fredam nebija nekāda vēlme ar kādu sākt runāt.
So he said, I'll stop the conversation right away.
Viņš saprata, tūlīt es pārtraušu sarunu.
And he says, well, actually, I'm a professor of homiletics,
Viņš saka, īstenībā es esmu homilētikas pasniedzējs.
knowing that the man wouldn't know what that meant.
Normāls cilvēks nemaz nezinātu, ko tas nozīmē.
And the man said, oh, so you're a preacher.
Un šis cilvēks saka, tu esi sludinātājs.
And he said, yeah, I am.
Viņš saka, jā, esmu tāds.
And the man said, let me tell you a preacher story.
Un tas vīrs saka, es tev izstāstīšu stāstu par sludinātājiem.
He said, I grew up in a small town,
Viņš saka, es uzaugu mazpilsētiņā,
but I was an illegitimate child.
un es biju ārlaudības bērns.
I didn't even know who my dad was.
Es pat nezināju, kas ir mans tēvs.
In a small town like that, everyone else knew that as well.
Un mazpilsētiņā ik viens zināja tieši to pašu, ko viņš.
And the boys at school called me names and made fun of me.
Un bērni skolā man apsaugāja un izsmēja.
When I walked down the street of the town, I just felt everyone looking at me.
Un ejot pa ielu, man bija sajūta, ka visi mani vēro.
Felt them asking to themselves, I wonder whose boy that is.
Un es dzirdēju, kā viņi pie sevis jautā,
Wonder,
kam šis
wonder
zēns
who his
ir?
father is.
Kas ir viņa tēvs?
It says one day a new preacher came to town.
Kādu dienu šajā pilsētiņā ieradās jauns sludinātājs.
And everyone started talking about how good he was.
Un visi runāja, cik viņš ir izcils.
So I decided to go hear him.
Un es nolēmu aiziet paklausīties viņu.
I snuck in late to church so no one would see me.
Es ielavījos baznīcā, kad jau viss bija sācies, lai neviens man nepievērstu uzmanību.
And left early
Un izgāju ātrāk ārā,
so I wouldn't have to talk to anyone.
lai man nebūtu nevienu jārunā.
But he was really good.
Bet viņš tiešām bija labs sludinātājs.
And so I kept coming back.
Un es nācu atkal un atkal.
He said, one Sunday the sermon was so good
Un viens svētdienas sprediķis bija tik labs,
that I got caught in it and forgot to leave early.
ka tas man tā pārņem, ka es aizmirsu, ka man ir jāpazūd ātrāk.
All of a sudden the service was over and I was going to have to walk out with everyone else.
Un pēkšņi dievnojums ir beidzies, un man jāiet ārā kopā ar visu skolu.
The pastor was already at the door greeting everyone as they left.
Mācītājs jau stāv pie durvīm, sveicinot ik vienu, kurš iet prom.
And I knew I wasn't going to be able to get past him.
Un es domāju, es garām viņam netikšu.
He said, I tried to sneak around.
Viņš saka, es centos tā kā tur kaut kur aizlavīties.
He said, all of a sudden I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder.
Un pēkšņi es jūtu, ka uz mani pats ir smaga roka.
And I looked up and it was the preacher.
Es paskatos, un tur ir sludinātājs.
He was big and tall.
Viņš bija liela auguma.
He said, I don't know you. What's your name, son?
Viņš teica, es tevi neprasīstu. Kāds tavs vārds, dēliņ?
I just shook. He said, whose son are you?
Viņš jautāja, kā dēls tu esi?
He wrote one, I said, I just shook at that question.
Viņš saka, no šī jautājuma es sāku trīcēt.
But before I could say anything, the pastor said this.
Bet pirms es varēju atbildēt, mācītājs teica,
I know who you are.
es zinu, kas tu esi.
I know who your family is.
Es zinu, kas ir tava ģimene.
There's a distinct family resemblance.
Ir īpaša ģimenes līdzība.
Why you're a son of God.
Tu esi Dieva bērns.
The old man went on to say,
Un tad šis vecais viss turpināja.
you know, mister, those words changed my life.
Zināt, kungs, šie vārdi mainīja man dzīvi.
And then the old man just got up from the table and left.
Viņš piecēlās un aizgāja.
A little bit later, the waitress came over
Pēc kāda brīdiņa pienāk apkalpotāja,
and said, did you know who you were talking to?
un viņš saka, jūs zināt, ar ko jūs sarunājaties?
I said, I guess some old man here.
Jā, ar kādu vecu vīro šeit.
And they said, no, that's Ben Hooper,
Nē, es saku, tas ir Bens Kūpers.
a two-time governor of the state of Tennessee.
Viņš divas reizes ir bijis Tenesijas štata gubernators.
Twice was elected as governor of the whole state.
Divas reizes viņu izvēlēja par visu štata gubernatoru.
And a change in identity
Un tas izmainīja identitāti.
changed his value
Izmainīja viņu vērtību.
and his belief in what he could actually do.
Un viņa ticība tam, ko viņš var paveikt.
It gave him the confidence to take on big challenges
Deva viņam drosmi uzņemties liels izaicinājums.
because he began to understand that he was a child of God.
Jo viņš sāk apzināties, ka ir Dieva bērns.
What do you think of when you think of who you are?
Kāda aina ir jūsu priekšā, kad jūs domājat, kas es tāds esmu par sevi?
Do you know that you're a son and daughter of God?
Vai zini, ka tu esi Dieva dēls, Dieva meita,
And that gives you tremendous value
kas piešķir tev milzu vērtību
and unbelievable possibilities.
un neticams iespējas.
Now, often this is messed up because of
Bieži vien tas tiek pārprasts.
father wounds and father vacuums.
Tāpēc, ka pastāv tēva radītie ievainojumi un tukšums.
I told you about Steve and his dad.
Es jums jau stāstīju par Stīvu un viņa tēti.
His dad, I was telling someone during the break, his dad is actually worth $500 million. So,
Kādam es pārtraukumā stāstīju, viņa tēvs sapelnīja $500 million.
but Steve he's rich and very poor.
Taču Stīvs ir pagāts un ļoti nabadzīgs. Stīvs padars. Stīvs ir pagāts un ļoti nabadzīgs.
Very poor emotionally. His dad was a horrible father.
Emocionālā ziņā, jo viņa tēvs bija briesmīgs tēvs.
And until today, he struggles with knowing who he is.
Un līdz pat šai dienai viņš cīnās ar jautājumu par to, kas viņš īsti ir.
He's still trying to find himself.
Viņš vēl joprojām sevi meklē.
Still trying to prove his father's wrong.
Joprojām mēģina pierādīt, ka tēvam nebija taisnība.
His dad, in fact, I just got a letter this week from him.
Un viņš saņēma vēstuli vēl šajā nedēļā no
He
tēva.
says it's really been tough. I offered to help my dad take care of our family foundation.
Un viņš saka, es gāju caur grūtībām. Es piedāvāju tēvam palīdzēt mūsu ģimenes fondā.
And my dad started it again and began to tell me how disappointed he is in me.
Un tēvs atkal sāk vecoties, un viņš sāk man teikt, cik viņš ļoti manī vīlies.
When I put forth an idea, he actually tries to compete with me and show that his idea is better.
Kad es piedāvāju kādu ideju, viņš mēģina ar mani sacensties un pierādīt, ka viņa doma ir labāka.
I said, I always feel like he's pushing me down to push himself up.
Un es sajūtos atkal, ka viņš man grūž uz leju un pats sevi ceļ uz augšu.
Well, his dad should be pulling him up. He should not pushing him
Viņa
down.
tētim vajadzētu viņu celt, nevis grūst uz leju.
And when that happens, that is very painful.
Un kad tas notiek, tas ir tik sāpīgi.
and often can have lasting consequences in our life.
Un bieži vien tas atstāja neizdzēšams pēdas mūsos.
Or sometimes we have father vacuums.
Reizē mums ir šie tēvi izraisītie tukšumi.
If we talk some about father gifts and father vacuums, I have a friend of mine named Gary.
Kāds mans draugs vārdā Gerijs,
and his dad passed away when he was 4.
kura tētis nomira tad, kad viņam bija 4 gadiņi.
His mom remarried,
Māte apprecējās par ko jauna,
but he never connected with his stepdad.
taču ar auģtēvu viņam nekad neizveidojas labas attiecības.
What was even harder was his dad was really, the dad that died was really an amazing man.
Vēl jau vairāk tāpēc, ka viņam aizgājušais tētis bija pārsteidzošs cilvēks.
And so he went through his whole life thinking, what would it have been like if my dad was still alive?
Tāpēc viņam visu mūžu bija jādomā, kā būtu, ja mans tētis vēl būtu dzīves.
Gary was really into baseball.
Gerijs ļoti mīlēja beisbolu.
And played very well.
Viņš ļoti labi to spēlēja.
But his stepdad never came to a single game.
Taču viņa patēvs nekad neatnāca uz viens spēli.
Was never interested in anything.
Tas viņu nekad neinteresēja.
And when I met him, he had kids of his own.
Kad es ar viņu iepazinos, viņam jau pašam bija bērni.
But still was kind of lost.
Taču joprojām viņš jutās tāds kā pazudis.
He said, I don't know who I am.
Viņš man saka, es nezinu, kas
He said, I wish I had a letter from my dad.
Kaut man būtu vēstule.
Or that he had left something saying, Gary, this is who you are, this is who you're going to become.
Kaut viņš būtu atstājis man kaut ko, kas teikt, Gary, lūk, kas tu esi, un tu par to kļūsi.
Because I just still feel kind of lost. I don't know who I am.
Es joprojām jūtos tāds kā pazudis. Es nezinu, kas es esmu.
I told you about Petra, who used to go to the bar and get her dad and bring him home.
Es jums stāstīju par Petru, kam vajadzēja iet uz bāru un pārvest mājās tēvu.
When Petra was young, her dad was just disappeared for a couple of years.
Vēl Petrai ļoti jaunai esot tēvs uz kādiem gadiem pazuda.
And her mom lived in large apartment buildings in the Czech Republic.
Un viņas māte dzīvoja daudzstāvu mājās Čehijā.
Her mom had to work hard and watch a child.
Mātei bija sūri jāstrādā un jāpieskat bērns.
So she would take her down to the common area between the apartments.
Un viņa aizved viņu uz to pagalmu.
And she built a fence.
Kur uzbūvēja sētu.
Pin for her.
Priekš savus mērķus.
And she put her down there so she could be outside.
Ielika tur meitu, lai viņa būtu svaigā gaisā.
And then just leave her.
Un atstāja tur viņu.
And so Petra has these memories of being like an animal in a cage.
Un tāpēc Petrai šīs atmiņas, ka viņa ir kā dzīvnieciņš krātiņā.
And she said people would walk by on their way to their apartment.
Un viņa saka, cilvēki iet garām pēc vienas mājām.
And they'd see this girl in a pin.
Un redz šo meitenīti aizgalvā.
And she was like, you know, who am I?
Un viņai šī saka, kas es tāda?
So she said, I started performing for them.
Viņa saka, tad es sāku uzstāties.
And when someone would walk by, I'd try to get their attention and make them laugh.
Un tad, kad kāds gāja garām, es mēģināju piesaistīt viņu uzmanību un likt viņam pasmieties.
And she said, I realized if I could make people laugh, then they would notice me and I'd be in a relationship with them.
Un viņa saka, man šķita, ja es varēšu likt viņam smieties, tad viņi man pieņems un mums būs kāds attiecības.
And so she became quite a performer.
Un viņa kļuva par skatuves
So
mākslinieku.
much so that she went into acting.
Viņa sāka apgūt aktieru mākslu.
She became very funny. She's really funny to be around.
Un viņa kļuva par ļoti smieklīgs personu, ir tiešām prieks būt kopā ar viņu.
But much of it was a wall.
Taču liela daļa no tā bija tikai aizsēs.
And I remember one time we were talking about very serious things.
Es atceros, ka mēs pārnām kaut ko ļoti nopietni.
And Petra just kept making jokes.
Un Petra vienkārši ģūpojās
And
visu laiku.
interrupting it.
Un pārtrauca.
And I said, Petra, why are you doing that?
Un es viņai saku, Petra, kāpēc tu tā dari?
And she says, I don't know. It's like my only identity is a comedian.
Es saku, es nezinu. Laikam ir tā, ka man vienīgā identitāte ir komiķa.
And I don't know how to do anything else.
Es nezinu, kā vispār citādāk izdarīt.
I had to kind of make my own identity
Man bija jārada savu identitāti.
out there in the pen,
Tur
outside.
šajā aizgalvā,
Because there was no one to tell me who I am.
jo neviens man nepateica, kas es tāda esmu.
Or tell me that my life had value.
Un nepateica, ka manai dzīvē ir vērtība.
You'll see in your sheet these sentences. Without identity from the Father,
Jūs redzat savos pierakstos, ka bez tēva identitātes,
you will be defined by people and circumstances around you.
tad tie būs cilvēki un apstākļi ap jums, kas jūs definēs.
This will be constantly changing and unstable.
Un tiem pastāvīgi mainīsies un būs nedroši.
You'll be very vulnerable to your environment.
Un jūs ļoti viegli varēsiet ievainot apstākļus.
And not have a clear sense of self.
Jūs nebūs skaidrs apziņas par to, kas pats esat.
You constantly need to prove yourself or defend yourself.
Pastāvīgi vajadzēs vai sev pierādīt vai aizstāvēties.
Instead of, I failed,
Tā vietā, lai teikt, ka man nesanāca,
you think, I'm a failure.
jūs domāsiet, es esmu zaudētājs.
See, without a clear sense of identity, then all of a sudden your performance becomes your identity.
Nevis tā ir jūsu identitāte, bet pēkšņi tas, kā jūs izturaties, kļūst par jūsu identitāti.
Because vacuums always draw things into them. There's an identity vacuum.
Vakums vienmēr sevī ko iesūdz, un tur ir identitātes vakums.
So I failed means I'm a failure.
Ja man ir neizdevies, tas nozīmē, ka es esmu neveiksmīgs.
Instead of they are disappointed in me,
Tā vietā, lai teiktu, viņi nav ar mani mierā.
I am disappointing
Es esmu tas, kurš liek citiem vilties.
because of this identity vacuum.
Atkal šeit parādās identitātes vakums.
Instead of it didn't work, I have to try again,
Tā vietā, lai teiktu, nesanāca. Jāmēģina vēlreiz.
you think I am incapable.
Tu domās, es neesmu spējīgs.
Instead of thinking, oh, that wasn't very worthwhile,
Tā vietā, lai domātu, tas nebija tik labi,
you think I'm worthless.
tu domās, es esmu bezvērtīgs.
Instead of your opinion is important,
Tā vietā, lai teiktu, jūsu viedoklis ir svarīgs,
you think I am what you think of me.
jūs domāsiet, es esmu tas, ko tu par mani domā.
And just look at that list and think,
Paskaties uz šo sarakstu
how full is this area in my life?
un pavērtējiet, cik aizpildīta ir šī joma manā dzīvē.
And again, it can actually be full even if you had a bad dad.
Un tā var būt aizpildīta arī tad, ja tēvs nav bijis labs.
If the father has filled it up.
Jo, ja to ir aizpildījis tēvs no turienes.
Now, one question I often get is,
Man bieži jautā,
how can fathers give identity to girls?
kā tēvi var dot identitāti meitām?
You know what's interesting is that if you have a good father influence,
Ja ir bijusi laba tēva ietekme,
the men become more masculine and the women become more feminine.
tad vīrieši ir vīrišķīgāki un sievietes sievišķīgākas.
And it's even true genetically.
Pat ģenētiski tāds notiek.
That a man has XY chromosomes and a woman has XX.
Ka vīrietim ir X un Y chromosoms un sievietei ir X un X.
So it's what the man gives to the egg that determines its gender.
Tā ka tas, ko vīrietis dod šai šūnai, nosaka dzimumu.
Gender is determined by the father, not the mother.
Dzimumu nosaka tēvs, nevis māte.
And spiritually it's very similar too, that
Ļoti līdzīgi arī garīgā ziņā.
good fathering produces very feminine women
Ka labs tēvs rada ļoti sievišķīgu sievieti.
because it creates safety for all of who they are to grow and blossom.
Jo tas rada drošību šai sievietei par to, kas viņa ir.
And if you don't have good fathering, you find everything moving towards the middle.
Un ja nav labu tēvu, tad viss virzās uz viduspunktu.
The men are not masculine
Vīrieši nav vīrišķīgi
and the women are not feminine.
un sievietes nav sievišķīgas.
Everything becomes kind of neuter.
Visi kļūst kaut kāds nekatrās
It's like
dzīves.
you have weak men and masculine women.
Ir vāji vīrieši un vīrišķīgas sievietes.
So I think both of those come from that strong father influence.
Tas viss nāk no stiprā tēva ietekmes vai tā trūkuma.
Now you may say, okay, but what about families where dad died or divorced and the father wasn't there?
Labi, ko teikt par ģimenēm, kur tēvs ir miris vai šķīries vai vienkārši tur nebija?
And actually, the fatherhood of God can come through other people as well.
Dieva tēva stāvoklis var ienākt arī ar citu cilvēku attiecībā.
And a mother who's very connected to God the Father
Un māte, kas ir ļoti cieši saistīta ar Dievu tēvu,
can actually stream the fatherhood of God to the child.
var straumēt Dieva tēva stāvokli uz bērnu.
Because the child will feel the father through her
Jo bērns sajutīs tēvu caur viņu
and through her relationship with the father.
un caur viņas attiecībām ar tēvu.
Now, she can't generate it herself,
Viņa nespēja pati to radīt.
but she can be the channel of the father's heart to them.
Taču viņa var būt kā kanāls tēva sirdī saviem bērniem.
Brothers, sisters, uncles, and aunts can also channel the father heart of God to children.
Brāļi, māsas, onkuļi un tāds arī var būt kā kanāls Dieva tēva sirdī šī bērni.
So while it's all sourced in the fatherhood of God, sometimes it comes to us through different channels.
Kaut arī tas viss nāk no Dieva Tēva sirds, reizēm tas nāk no dažādiem kanāliem.
Or even through other father figures in our lives.
Varbūt pat caur citiem cilvēkiem, kas aizpild Tēva lomu mūsu dzīvē.
Okay, let's go on to the next one.
Mēs pārējām pie nākamā.
And let's go back to John 5.
Un mēs atgriežamies pie Jāņa evaņģēlija 5. nodaļas.
Because Jesus continues.
Jēzus turpināja.
And this is what he says. Verse 26. Or is that? No, 20. He says, for the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does.
Jo Tēvs mīl Dēlu un rāda viņam visu, ko viņš dara.
Isn't this amazing? In John 5, we find exactly the same issues.
Vai nav pārsteidzoši, ka Jāņa evaņģēlija 5. nodaļā mēs atrodam tās pašas tēmas?
It starts out talking about identity. The next thing he talks about is love.
Sāk runāt par identitāti, nākamais, ko viņš pievien, ir mīlestība.
And he says, the Father loves me.
Viņš saka, Tēvs mani mīl.
Now, it's one thing for a father to say, I love my kids.
Un viens ir pateikt, es mīlu savus bērnus.
It's another thing for kids to say, we know our Father loves us.
Pavisam kas cits ir, kad bērns saka, mēs zinām, mūsu Tēvs mūs mīl.
We feel and experience that love.
Jūs sajūtat, jūs piedzīvot šo mīlestību.
And it's not that we just guess that it exists, but we actually, it comes towards us. We experience it.
Nav tikai tā, ka mēs zinām, ka tā ir jābūt, bet tā nāk pie mums, mēs to piedzīvojam.
It's interesting that one of the ways he experiences the Father's love is he says, the Father shows me everything he does.
Interesanti, ka viens no veidiem, kā viņš pieredz Tēva mīlestību, ir, ka viņš saka, Tēvs rāda man visu, ko viņš dara.
So part of love is self-disclosure.
Daļa no mīlestības ir sevis atklāšana.
I feel loved when someone lets me in.
Es jūtos mīlēti, kad kāds man ielaiž.
Lets me know what's going on in their heart.
Un ļauj man ieraudzīt, kas notiek šīs personas sirdī.
And often fathers don't let their children in at all. You don't know what's going on in his heart.
Un ļoti bieži tēvi neielaiž savus bērnus, un jūs nezināt, kas notiek
Does it show you anything?
Viņi jums neko neatklāja.
Now, I already told you this was an area my dad was not strong in.
Es jau stāstīju, šī bija joma, kurā mans tēvs, tā nebija man tēvs stiprākāks.
I kind of knew intellectually that he loved me.
Es intelektuālā līmenī zināju, ka viņš man mīl.
But he didn't know how to express it.
Taču viņš nezināja, kā to izpaust.
So I've had to talk to other people like, how did you experience your father's love?
Un tad man bija jānāk citiem cilvēkiem jautāt, kā jūs piedzīvojat Tēva mīlestību?
One of my friends talked about a place where he deeply experienced his father's love.
Un viens no maniem draugiem stāstīja par veidu vietu, kur viņš to piedzīvoja.
He says his father used to actually listen to a radio program.
Viņš teica, tēvs klausījās radio programmu,
called The Greatest Story Ever Told.
Kas saucas lielākais stāsts, kas ir kad stāstīts.
About the greatest man who ever lived.
Par izcilāko cilvēku, kurš ir kad dzīvojis.
It's a radio program about Jesus.
Programma par Jēzu.
Stories from the life of Jesus.
Stāsts par Jēzus dzīves.
And he says his father every Sunday night would sit down in the living room, turn on the radio.
Viņš saka, ka katru svētdienas vakaru tēvs apsēdās dzīvojamā istabā, ieslēdz radio.
And called him to sit beside him.
Un paaicināja viņu apsēsties blakus.
Right beside his chair.
Blakus viņa krēslam.
And he would put his hand on his shoulder.
Un viņš uzlika roku uz pleca.
And then listen to these stories about Jesus.
Un klausījās šos stāstos par Jēzu.
And my friend talks about the feeling of his dad's hand on his shoulder.
Un mans draugs atceras šo sajūtu, viņa tēva roku uz pleca.
And that physical contact, that strong presence of his dad.
Fiziskais kontakts, šī spēcīgā tēva klāta.
Reaching out to him.
Sniedzoties pēc viņa.
And then he says sometimes as the story would go on,
un reizē viņš saka, šis stāsts turpinās.
The hand would start to shake.
Un šī roka sāk trīcēt.
And he'd look back.
Un es paskatos.
And just see tears going down his dad's face.
Un redz, ka pat tētis seju ir asas.
And to feel his father's heart
sajust tēva sirdi
was so powerful to him.
Nozīmē viņam tik daudz.
And he treasures those experiences to this very day. He felt his father's self-disclosure and his father's love.
Un viņš līdz šai dienai šīs atmiņas ļoti labā, svētā piemiņā viņam tik daudz nozīmē tie brīži ar tēvu.
See, those are wonderful gifts.
Tās ir brīnišķīgas dāvanas.
But sometimes, in place of that,
reizēm tā vietā,
people have pretty significant wounds in this area.
Cilvēki šajā jomā ir guvuši diezgan nopietnas savainojumus.
Like feel love at all.
Man nemaz nemīl.
Maybe they feel their father's anger,
Varbūt viņi sajūt tēva dusmas.
like they're an interruption all the time.
It kā viņi būtu tikai traucētas visu laiku.
That what they do is never right, never enough.
Nekad nevar izdarīt viņam par prātam, nekad nebūs pietiekami.
Or they have this vacuum.
Vai arī ir šis vakums.
My daughter, many of her friends are not Christians, probably like a lot of yours.
Mans meitas draugi daudzi nav kristieši, droši vien tāpat ir arī jums.
And one of her friends, she said, came to school one day super happy.
Un viņa saka, viena no manām draugiem atnāca skolu vienu dienu, tik laimīga.
And she said, what happened? You were just so happy today.
Viņa saka, kas noticis? Tu šodien izskaties tik laimīga.
And she said, yesterday my dad told me for the first time in my life that he loved me.
Viņa saka, vakar mans tēvs pirmoreiz mūžā pateica, ka viņš man mīl.
It was the first time I ever heard those words.
Tā bija pirmā reize, kad es šos vārdus dzirdēju.
And then she went on to say, well, he was totally drunk.
Un tad viņa turpināja, jā, viņš bija galīgi dilvā.
But that's okay.
Bet tas nekas.
He still said it.
Bet viņš to pateica.
Okay, can you imagine the first time in your life that you hear your father say, I love you, it's only because he's so drunk that he doesn't know what to say.
Pirmo reizi, kad tēvs mums pasaka, ka viņš jūs mīl, ir tikai tāpēc, ka viņš ir galīgi piedzēries.
But she was so excited because she finally heard those words.
Bija tādā sajūsmā, ka beidzot izdzird šos vārdus.
So what do we do when we have those vacuums?
Ko mēs darām, kad mums ir šie tukšumi?
And remember, I already talked about that wounds.
Es atceros jau runāju par ievainojumiem.
Wounds create two things. Do you remember those two things?
Ievainojumi izraisa divas lietas. Atcerieties, kas tās ir?
Distortions.
Izkropļojumi.
Like I overreact or
Es nepareizi reaģēju
restrain. Or
walls. Vai arī sienas.
Like that armor to keep myself from
Tā
getting
kā
hurt.
bruņas, lai sevi paslēptu.
And the vacuums create poles
Un šie tukšumi izraisa tieksmes
or closed doors.
vai arī aizvērts durvis.
I had a love vacuum.
Man ir bijuši daudz tukšumu.
That was pretty significant.
Tas bija ļoti jūtami.
Now, if you would have come to me and said, Dave, do you have a love vacuum?
Ja jūs man būtu tad pajautājuši, Dave, vai tev ir daudz tukšuma?
No, not at all.
Nē, nepavisam.
Because my dad's great.
Jo mans tētis ir super.
He didn't do anything wrong, so I must not need love, right?
Viņš neko nav izdarījis sliktu, droši vien man tik daudz arī vajadzēja.
Closed door.
Un tās durvis tiek aizstāvēt.
In fact, I don't really need people.
Patiesībā viņam nemaz nevajag
I'm fine.
Patiesībā man nevajag cilvēku.
God loves me. Oh, that's nice for other people. I don't need that.
Ja arī citiem to vajag, man to vajag.
So you see that closed door.
Jūs redzat šīs durvis, kas ir cietas.
But something else most people didn't know about.
Ir vēl kaut kas cits, ko lielākā daļa cilvēku nezināja.
I often felt horribly lonely.
Es bieži jutos ārkārtīgi vientuļš.
And when I was in my room writing in my journal at night,
Kad es savā istabā rakstīju dienas grāmatā vakarā,
I still have those journals.
es joprojām glabāju šīs dienas grāmatas.
You would see a totally different Dave.
Jūs tur ieraudzījāt pilnīgi citu Deivu.
You would see a Dave that was going, do I have any friends?
Tur būtu Deivs, kurš jautā, vai man draugi vispār ir?
Anyone really care about me?
Vai kādam ir svarīgi, kā man iet?
Sometimes it would express itself even in ways you wouldn't expect.
Un reizēm tas izpaudās pat tādos veidos, kā to neviens negaidīja.
That was back in the day before pornography was as easily accessible as today.
Tas vēl bija tajos laikos, kad pornogrāfija nebija tik viegli pieejama.
Sometimes when I think of the world that you're growing up in, you young men, I just shudder. I hope you're accountable with someone else because it's dangerous out there. I hope you're accountable to someone else. It's very dangerous.
Reizēm, kad es domāju par jums jauniešiem, kam jāaug šādā kultūrā,
Everything
vienkārši jānoturēt. Es domāju, kaut jums būtu kāds, ko priekšā jūs esat atbildīgi, jo tas ir bīstami.
Everything is one click away.
Jo viss ir tikai klikšķi atstatumā.
It wasn't when I was in high school.
Man vidusskolas laikos tā nebija.
But I found out that in the back of the library,
Bet es kādā bibliotēkas stūrītī
there were lots of kind of fashion magazines.
atradu daudz modes žurnālus.
And often there'd be advertisements that would have women that weren't wearing very much.
Un bieži vien tur bija reklāmas, kur sievietes pārāk īpaši nebija centušās kaut ko uzņemt.
And I would go back and find the ones. And
Un
go
es tur
through,
klusībā pāršķirstīju,
trying to find pictures of women not wearing very much.
meklējot sieviešu attēlus, kuras pārāk daudz nebija sev uzņēmušas.
In the back where no one could see me.
tur aizmugurē, kur neviens man nevarēja redzēt.
And for some reason, it touched me emotionally.
Un kaut kādā iemeslā tas man emocionāli aizskāja.
It was like it touched a love spot in me somehow.
Un kaut kādā veidā tas aizskāja tādu mīlestības punktu.
Like somehow thinking about that woman sexually made me feel love somehow.
Domājot par šo sievietes seksu nozīmē, kaut kā man pēkšņi jādomā par mīlestību, vai ka es tiek mīlēts.
And often for men, a vacuum in the area of love
Un bieži vien vīriešiem, ja ir tukšums mīlestības jomā,
will express itself into pornography
tas izpaudīsies pornogrāfijā
and addictions to pornography.
un atkarībā no pornogrāfijas.
Because the way a man is put together, the physical and sexual is very closely tied to the touch of love.
Jo vīrietis ir tā veidots, ka viņam fiziskais un emocionālais mīlestības pieskāriens ļoti cieši.
And they often get mixed up.
Un bieži vien viņi neapstājas.
And looking at that woman offering herself to you
Un ja viņi skatās to sievieti, kas sevi piedāvā,
can feel like a love connection.
viņi pēkšņi izjūtā kā mīlestības saiti.
And somehow for a few moments
Un uz kādiem brīžiem
touch you in this area of your need for love.
tas var aizskat mūsu šajā vajadzībā pēc mīlestības.
By the way, this is how addictions get established.
Tieši tā veidojas atkarības.
Because addictions only work because there's a true need.
Atkarības var rasties tikai tad, kad ir īsta vajadzība.
Do you know, drugs actually lock into spots in myself that are designed to accept other things? I'll explain this in a second.
Narkotikas iespiež kādā daļā no manas būtības.
Have any of you ever had a runner's high, like you run and then you feel really good afterwards?
Kādreiz jūs atceraties pēc kārtīgas skrējiena pēkšņi ir šī te labsajūta.
That's because your body's producing its own drugs
Jo ķermenis saražo pats savas narkotikas,
to make you feel better.
lai liktu justies labāk.
And that helps you learn to do something unpleasant like running.
Un tas mums liek izdarīt kaut ko nepatīkamu, piemēram, skriet.
Because it gives you a good feeling afterwards.
Jo pēc tam ir labs sajūta.
Well, drugs fake that feeling.
Narkotikas novilto šo sajūtu.
So it's an illegitimate answer to a legitimate need.
Tā ir nelikumīga atbilde likumīgai vajadzībai.
A destructive answer to a true need.
Tā ir postoša atbilde patiesai vajadzībai.
And often for some men, they become addicted to pornography.
Un bieži vien kāds vai kāda kļūst atkarīgi no
Is that
pornogrāfijas.
pornography is actually touching their need for love
Tāpēc, ka pornogrāfija uzrunā viņu vajadzību pēc mīlestības.
and meeting it in a way that's not really true.
Un to atrisina tādā nepatiesā veidā.
But it feels kind of like love.
Taču sajūta ir tāda, ka it kā būtu mīlestība.
And because I'm thirsty, I'll drink dirty water.
Un tā kā mans slāpst, tad es dzeršu.
And then I become in this addictive relationship.
Un tā veidojas atkarības pilnas attiecības.
Now, just the same way as with drugs, the reason why pornography is so dangerous
Tieši tāpat kā narkotikā, iemesls, kāpēc pornogrāfija ir tik bīstama.
is, guys, when you're done looking at those pictures,
Jo puiši, kad jūs beidzat skatīties šīs bildes,
you feel guilt and shame,
jūs sajutīsiet kaunu
and then you're more closed off to real relationships.
un kļūsiet noslēgtāki īstajām attiecībām.
Or you view relationships in distorted ways,
Vai arī jūs saskatīsiet attiecības izkropļotā veidā.
and because of that, you won't be able to have a true one.
Un tāpēc jūs neizdosiet izveidot īstas attiecības.
And so when you feed on that false food,
Ja jūs sevi barojat ar šo viltus ēdienu,
you're less and less able to eat the true food of true intimacy and relationships. as
jūs
God
arvien
intended.
mazāk spēsiet ēst patieso ēdienu, kas ir patiesa tuvība.
So that's a little sideline, but guys, believe that you are made for intimacy.
Un tas ir jau mazliet novirzoties no tēmas, bet puiši saprotat, ka jūs esat radīti tuvībai.
And that God wants to meet those needs.
Un ka Dievs vēlas šīs vajadzības piepildīt.
But pornography will not take you there.
Taču pornogrāfija jūs tur neaizvedīs.
Now, women, you struggle with this issue too, but just in a different way.
Arī sievietes saduras ar šo jautājumu, bet citādā izpratnē.
Often this need for love will express itself in unhealthy emotional attachments.
Bieži vien šī vajadzība pēc mīlestības izpaužas neveselīgos emocionālos pieķeršanās gadījumos.
A friend of mine grew up in a Christian home.
Kāds mans draugs uzauga kristiešu ģimenē,
She's 21 years old now.
bet šis draugs ir viņa, un viņai tagad 25 gads.
She's 22. And
Nu, jau 22.
and she's teaching school for the first time.
Un viņa ir sākusi mācīties bērnu skolā.
And also dating a non-Christian.
Un viņa satiekas ar cilvēku, kurš nav kristietis.
And this non-Christian is not a good guy.
Un šis cilvēks nav kristietis, arī nav labs puisis.
Going nowhere with his life.
Viņa dzīve neved nekur.
He has no direction.
Viņam nav virziena.
He's got terrible habits.
Viņam ir briesmīgi ievainojumi.
He's very irresponsible.
Viņš ir ļoti bezatbildīgs.
He's not interested in God.
Viņu Dievs neinteresē.
He's not a good influence on her.
Viņš neatstāja labu iespēju uz viņu.
And why in the world is she in this relationship?
Kāpēc gan lai viņa būtu šajās attiecībās?
And what she'll say is,
Viņa teiks tā,
he's the only person I feel totally loved with.
viņš ir vienīgais, kur klātbūtnē es jūtos pilnībā mīlēt.
And so somehow he's gotten past those walls
Kaut kādā veidā viņš ir ticis garām šiem mūriem
and become her source of love.
un kļūst par viņas mīlestības avotu.
And because of that, she's not able to leave the relationship.
Un tieši tādēļ viņa nespēja pārtraukt šīs attiecības.
Now, what would happen if this love tank was filled up?
Kas notiktu, ja šī mīlestības vieta būtu jau aizpildīta?
And she could say, I'm not starving for love.
Viņa varētu teikt, es neesmu izsalkus pēc
I'm
mīlestības.
full of love
Es esmu mīlestības pārpilns
from my Father.
no savu tēvu.
Then I can stop drinking this dirty water because I've got clean water somewhere else.
Man nav vairs jādara šis netīrais ūdens, es varu atrast tīru ūdeni citur.
So the same way as men often become addicted to pornography because of vacuums in this area of love.
Tieši tāpat vīrieši bieži kļūst atkarīgi no pornogrāfijas, jo viņiem ir vakums šajā mīlestības jomā.
Women often become addicted to unhealthy emotional relationships
Sievietes bieži kļūst atkarīgas no neveselīgām emocionālām attiecībām
or to emotional fantasy
vai emocionālām fantāzijām.
that pretends to meet that need and really doesn't.
Sevi mānot, ka šī vajadzība jau ir apmierināta, kaut arī tā nav.
You have this written in your notes.
Tas arī rakstīts jūsu piezīmēs.
Without love, you'll be constantly trying to gain love from those near you.
Bez mīlestības jūs pastāvīgi centīsieties iekarot mīlestību no tiem, kas ir ap jums.
Their love will never be enough,
Taču ar viņu mīlestību nekad nepietiks.
and you'll be chronically disappointed.
Un jums būs jāraud vilšanās brīžos.
You may cope by turning off your emotions and becoming distant and cold.
Jūs varat mēģināt ar to tikt galā, izslēdzot emocijas un kļūstot tādam atsevišķinātam un augstam.
Again, if I'm filled up with the Father's love,
Taču, ja man ir aizpildījusi tēva mīlestība,
it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate your love.
tas nenozīmē, ka es nevērtēju jūsu mīlestību.
It actually means that I probably will appreciate it more
Īstenībā tas nozīmē, ka es to droši vien novērtēšu vairāk,
because my heart will be open
jo man sirds būs
and
atvērta
I'll receive it.
un es pieņemšu.
And my heart will be full and I'll give it back.
Man sirds būs piepildīta un es to spēšu dot tālāk.
And the full, healthy heart of God's love will allow me to give and receive in very free ways.
Sirds, kas ir veselīga, pilna ar Dieva mīlestību, ir gatava pieņemt un dot to bez maksas citiem.
So you'll have a hard time trusting love.
Jums arī tad būs grūti noticēt mīlestībai.
It may not penetrate, it may bounce off.
Tā varbūt nemaz neiesniegsies iekšā, tā varbūt atliks kā bumiņa.
Your relationships will be consumed with getting rather than giving.
Un jūsu attiecības iezīmēsies ar vairāk ņemšanu nekā došanu.
And you'll have a hard time giving love to others.
Un jums būs ļoti grūti sniegt mīlestību citiem.
Can you see how important those two things are?
Jūs redzat, cik šīs divas lietas ir svarīgas?
Those are really, really important.
Tas ir tiešām svarīgas.
I read not long ago an article about Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson's brother.
Netik sen es lasīju rakstu par Michael Jacksonu, Janet Jacksons brāli.
And you know how he died?
Jūs zināt, kā viņš nomira?
He was just taking all kinds of different pills.
Viņš lietoja visdažādākos medikamentus.
Pills to make him go to sleep,
Medikaments, kas ļauj viņam aizmigt.
pills to wake him up,
Medikaments, kas ļauj
pills to
pamosties.
stabilize his mood,
Kas nostiprināja, stabilizēja viņa garstāvokli.
because this hurt, that hurt, that hurt.
Jo viņam stāvēja tur un citur.
He had a full-time doctor who just told him which pills to take at what times.
Viņam ir pastāvīgs ārsts, kurš to vien teica, kādas zāles kurā laikā lietot.
And one of his friends wrote this about him.
Un viens no viņa draugiem rakstīja par viņu.
He said, Michael always thought he had an ailment of the body, a sickness of the body.
Maikls bija pastāvīgi pārliecināts, ka viņam ir kāda slimība.
But he had a sickness of the soul.
Taču īstenībā tā bija dvēseles slimība.
He kept trying to fix it in the wrong place.
Un viņš to mēģināja nepareizā vietā ārstēt.
And then he went on to say, the thing that drove Michael every day
Viņš turpina. Maikla ikdienas virzītājs spēks
was an attempt to get his father's love,
bija vēlēšanās iegūt tēva mīlestību.
because he never felt that his father loved him.
Viņš nekad nebija jūtis, ka tēvs viņu mīlētu.
He even said his desire to please that huge audience
Viņš teica, pat viņa vēlme izpatikt milzu auditoriju
was often driven by a desire to somehow please his dad.
bieži vien tika virzīta no vēlmes kaut kā izpatikt tēti.
And the man went on and said, because what Michael wanted more than anything else was the love and approval of his dad.
Un tad šis cilvēks turpina, tā kā Maikam visvairāk interesē viņa tēva mīlestība un atzinība,
And he never had it.
ko viņš nekad nesaņēma.
And then it just creates this weird behavior like what he was doing in his relationships with those boys and
Tad rodās šī dīvainās izturēšanās viņa attiecības ar
a
sēniem.
lot of strange stuff.
Daudz kas tur bija savāds.
Well, when this is not full with the Father,
Kad šī vieta nav
it
pilna ar
distorts the way
tēvu,
we relate to others.
tad tas izpaudīsies attiecībās ar citiem.
Right? We're still in that section of awareness,
Mēs joprojām esam šajā vietā, kas sauc apzināšanās.
which is not always very fun.
Nevienmēr tas ir ļoti jautri.
You may feel stirred up right now
Varbūt jūs jūtat, ka kaut kas jūsos tiek uzjundīts,
because these issues are very emotional.
jo šīs lietas ir ļoti emocionāls.
You may just even be feeling tossed around a little bit by your own emotions.
Varbūt, ka jūs jūtat, ka jūsu emocijas jūs mazliet mētā.
So hang in there with me, okay? 'Cause
Turieties šajā vietā kopā ar mani.
what I'd like you to do now
Es gribētu, lai jūs tagad
is begin working on your Father map.
sāktu darboties pie tās kartas, kas ir tēva karta.
I'm going to give you about 10 or 15 minutes to work on the first two
Jums būs
areas.
10-15 minūtes, lai darbotos ar šīm divām pirmajām jomām.
And the first thing I'd like you to do
Pirmais, ko jums būtu jādara,
is I'd like you to just, let me think, yeah, probably, just kind of guess
teiksim tā, pat izsakiet minējumu.
how full is this area of Father gifts?
Cik pilna ir šī joma ar tēva dāvanām?
How much space is filled with wounds?
Cik daudz no tā ir aizpildīts ar ievainojumiem?
And how much space is vacuum?
Un cik daudz ir tukšumu?
Now you may go, oh, it's totally filled with gifts.
Un jūs varat teikt, pilns ar dāvanām.
Or maybe it's all vacuum.
Vai arī viens vienīgs tukšums.
Or it's just a bunch of wounds.
Vai arī tikai ļoti daudz
No, I just
savaitot.
want you to kind of, before you do it, stop and pray.
Taču pirms to darām, apstāsimies, lūksim Dievu.
And ask the Holy Spirit to kind of give you a picture of your heart.
Un lūksim, lai svētais gars atklāj mums mūsu sirds ainu.
Now, what I want you to do is give it its current condition.
Es gribētu, lai šajā stāvoklī,
Because maybe you had a really good dad, but you still feel pretty empty in that area.
varbūt, ka jums ir ļoti labs teicis, un tomēr jūs jūtaties diezgan tukši šajā jomā.
And maybe you had a really rotten dad,
Un varbūt ir raņķīgs tēvs,
but God has done some work in your heart and you're totally filled up.
bet Dievs ir izdarījis savu darbu, un jūs esat pilnībā piepildīts.
So I want you to just say, what's the state of my heart right now in those areas?
Un es gribu, lai jūs pajautāt, kāds ir mans sirds stāvoklis
And
šajā
ask the Holy
jomā tieši
Spirit
tagad.
to kind of show. And then just
Un lūdzēt, lai svētais gars to parāda.
how much of it is gifts, how much of it is
Cik
things.
daudz ir dāvans, cik daudz ir savainojums, cik daudz ir tukšums.
And then to the left, I want you to just write some observations. And those observations, I want you to write about your dad,
Un kreisajā pusē es gribu, lai jūs uzrakstītu kādus secinājumus, kāds novērojums, pirmkārt par tēti savu,
or about other significant father figures in your life.
vai par citiem cilvēkiem, kas ir spēlējuši nozīmīgu tēvu lomu jūsu dzīvē.
Because some of you may have a significant wound from maybe a teacher,
Varbūt kādam no jums ir ļoti dziļš savainojums no
or
skolotāja,
someone else, you know, a grandfather, or
vai
something
kāds
like
cita
that.
vectēviem.
Or you may have gotten some significant gifts from one of them too.
Varbūt no kāda no tiem jūs esat saņēmis kāds nozīmīgs dāvans.
But again, kind of ask the Lord, what observations can I make in this area of gifts, wounds, and vacuums? And just write some
Es
observations.
gribētu, lai es lūgtu Dievu, lai viņš mums atklāja, kā tad ir jūsu sirdī ar šīm dāvanām, ievainojumiem un tukšumu.
Do the drawing, write the observations, then do the same for this area.
Aizpildiet šo vietu, uzrakstiet savus secinājumus, un tad izdariet to pašu šai jomai.
Pray before you do,
Atkal lūdziet Dievu, pirms jūs to darat,
and then I'll have some questions for you.
un tad man būs jums jautājumi.